create a simple animated character. Over the next 5 sections, we're going to go from Illustrator to After Effects and create an animated looping walk cycle like this guy here. This is section 1, in which we will be illustrating the torso and head of the character. We'll be using strokes to create the arms and legs. And finally, we'll be separating the Illustrator file into layers ready for animation. Now, the first thing we're going to do is create a new Illustrator file. And in the example I'm going to make, we're going to create a guy, much like the person in our loop there that I showed you. He's going to have a big distended stomach and very simple head. So we're going to start off with a circle here, and we're going to colour it. I'm going to be wearing blue jeans. I'm going to colour it blue. Get rid of the stroke around the outside. And we're going to split this up into his jeans, and he's going to be wearing a sleeveless t-shirt. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a series of lines that are going to let us break this circle up into constituent parts. I'm going to colour these lines using the stroke colour here. I'm going to colour them black. And that's going to be his armhole. And this is going to be the hole for his neck. And then all I'm going to do, I'm going to go into my Pathfinder tool there. You can find that in Window and Pathfinder. That'll bring up this console. And if you just check the divide section there, what we'll then do is we'll get rid of the bits that we don't need. That's what we've got as a circle. We're going to colour his shirt. And I'm going to colour his shirt here, kind of slightly off-white, just so we can see it against the background. His jeans are already blue, and then I'm going to give him his skin colour. It's going to have a bit of a tan. So there we go. So this is our torso, and I'm just going to save this file. I'm going to call it character 5. That's just because I've messed this up 4 times already. There we go. And the next thing we're going to do is give him a head. Now, I'm going to use the lozenge file here using the colour that we've already got for his skin to create a kind of long head shape. And I'm just going to select this point at the bottom and delete it, so that now we've got a shape that looks like this. And that's just going to sit there like that. And that is as simple as our character is. He's really only a few basic shapes. Now, just so we give him a little bit of character here, I'm going to draw a cap on him. I'm going to give him a baseball cap. Let's make it red. There we go. I'm going to draw in the back of the baseball cap, underside of the brim, using the pen tool. Give that a bit of a shadow and just send that to the back. And then I'm going to copy and paste his head there over the top of our cap. I'm going to I'm going to colour that the same colour as his caps. This is going to be the top of the head. And I'm just going to, again, I'm going to use our Pathfinder tool to delete everything at the top of the cap. There we go, and there's our guy. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to shadow his face a little bit, just so it looks like the cap is casting a bit of shade on his face again. I'm going to use the Pathfinder tool. I'm going to delete the piece I don't want, and I'm going to make this part of his head a little bit darker. And then if you just edit cut and then edit, paste in front. There's his cat back in place. If we zoom out, there we go. There's our basic character. There's the head and torso of our character, and these are the parts of the character that we're gonna, when we bring into Illustrator, when we bring into After Effects, are gonna remain constant. And we're gonna, although we're gonna design the arms and legs in Illustrator, we're gonna be replacing them with strokes and other shapes in After Effects. Okay, so next up, what we're going to create is his arms and legs, and for this we're going to use the pen tool again. Start his shoulder here, down to his hands, and we're going to reverse the color out to create a stroke, and we're going to fill in that stroke there. Let's call it 20 width, and we're going to use the round cap on the end of this. And what I might do is just blow up the hole for his arm there. I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste his arm to the other side, I'm going to reflect it. There we go. And arrange center back. And next, we're going to create his legs. We're going to use the same method as we did for the arms, except I'm going to color them. I'm going to use the color picker to have them be the same shape, same color as the jeans. And this time I'm going to leave them with a flat end here. We've got the round cap, and this is what they call a butt cap. Didn't know that until now. So this is the leg nearest to us, and we're going to create another leg here slightly further away. And what we're going to do with this one, we're going to create, again, we're going to give it a little bit of shadow so it feels like when we have it behind the stomach that it's a little, that it's that the stomach is casting a shadow on this rear leg. So what I've done is I've copied and pasted the leg back over the top of itself. I'm going to select them both, and I'm going to arrange them and send them to the back. And then I'm just going to shorten this one here. So there we go. So there's our guy. There's his arms, legs in place. And you might want to move bits and pieces around. I'm just going to tilt him back further slightly. Can move his arms around a bit. I'm going to have this one slightly more obscured by his body. I'm going to move his head to the back. There we go. And there's our guy. Now the final part of this section, we're going to split our character up, ready for animation in After Effects. So what we're going to do, we're going to select the head, edit, cut. We're going to create a new layer, again, window, and you can find the layers in there, and that will open the layer console. We're going to create a new layer, and we're going to edit, paste in front, and there's our head back on a new layer. We're going to label this layer head. Now we're going to take all the elements of our torso that we created initially. We're going to do the same thing, edit, cut, new layer, edit, paste in front, and there we go. We're going to call this torso. Now what we're going to do next, the arms and legs, as I said, we're going to rebuild these in After Effects, but we're going to have them in the Illustrator file as a guide for when we build them. And we're going to do the same thing with the legs that are going to be in front of the torso. We're going to go edit, cut, create a new layer. I'm going to place the new layer in front of the torso here, and edit, paste in front. And we're going to call this arms and legs front. And then this final layer that we have left behind in the correct place, we're going to call arms and legs back. And there we go. There's our character split up and ready for animation. You can see how simple he is here. He's just a couple of shapes for the a couple of circles for the head and torso, and then these 4 strokes that we've used for the arms and legs. Okay, welcome to part 2 of Create a Simple Animated Character titled Building in After Effects. In this section we're going to be adjusting our project settings and preferences. We're going to import our Illustrator character into After Effects. We're going to scale the comp and character. We're going to create arms and legs using the shapes and the pen tool. And finally, we're going to be creating shadows using the trim path function. So we're going to open After Effects now. And the first thing we're going to do here, we're going to go into our preferences, into General, and we're going to turn Default Spatial Interpolation to Linear. And there's a very good but very boring reason as to why we're going to do this. I'm not going to explain it now, as it's a bit obtuse. The other thing we're going to do, as part of our housekeeping, we're going to go File, Project Settings, and we want to display the time on our timeline here in frames rather than seconds, and we'll see why when we get to animation. Okay. So now we're going to import our Illustrator file into After Effects, and we're going to go File, Import, Import File. And inside my Skillshare folder, in the Illustrator folder, I've got my character. Now mine's called Character 5, yours probably should be called Character. Now the important thing here to note is that we don't want to import this as footage. We're not importing it as a flat object. We want to import it as something that we can move the independent layers within. So we want to import it as a composition. And you'll notice that these two, the folder and the composition have now been imported. The folder contains the arms, legs, head and torso layers individually. And if we double click on the composition folder, we see we've got head, front arms, torso, and arms and legs, just as we had in the Illustrator file. So we have our composition on screen here with our man in it, and you'll notice here is the scale of the composition. So we're seeing it at half size at 50%. At full size, this is still quite a small composition. So what we're going to do, we're going to go Composition and Composition Settings, and we're going to make this 1920 by 1080 full HD, and we're going to make it 200 frames long. There we go. Now if we zoom back out, we'll see that our character is now small in frame. So what we're going to do is open up, select all our layers here. We're going to go into Transform, and we're going to slide the scaler up. Now you'll notice that he starts to become slightly blurry, and that's because when you import Illustrator files, you need to do what's called constantly rasterize them, which means use them as vectors rather than as rastered images. So all we're going to do to compensate for that is click the little constant rasterize icon here, and then our character's fixed, and we can see if we view him at full size that has perfect resolution, good anti-aliasing around the edges. There we go. Okay, so we've got our character now, and what we're going to do is start to replace the arms and legs that we've drawn in Illustrator with shape layers that we're going to be able to animate. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to select everything here, we're going to open it up, and we want the opacity here. So if you select both the arms and legs layers, we're going to drop the opacity from 100% just down to about 20, just so that they're a guide now and we can draw over the top of them. So recompress them. Now you want to select the pen tool next, making sure that none of these layers are selected. So you don't have you're not got the head selected there. You want to just click on the comp so that nothing's selected. You've got no layer selected. First thing we do, place a point where the shoulder is and draw our stroke just like you would in Illustrator. So we've created a new shape layer. It's called shape layer 1, but we're going to rename this. We're going to call it arm front. There we go. Now if you open up the arm, you'll see that we've got contents in here, and inside this, all the parameters of this line are expressed. So if we open up the path, you can see that we've got the path that we've created, and we can move that about with the mouse. But we want to focus on the stroke. So inside here, you've got the width, the opacity, the color, and the way the ends of the lines are expressed just like you would do in Illustrator. So the first thing we're going to do is color the arm the same as the body. The next thing we're going to do is expand the stroke width to match that of our arm already. And you'll notice here that again the bottom of the arm is flat, and we want to take the line cap and round that. So there we go. So now we have an arm as we have in Illustrator. Now we're going to do the same thing again and redraw another arm, but we want it to be exactly the same. So what we can do is Control C or edit copy, and then edit paste, and we've got a second arm here, and we're going to call this arm back. And because we want this arm to sit behind the torso, we're going to place it behind the torso in the comp. Now again, I'm going to close arm front here. I'm going to go into arm back, into the contents, into the shape, and finally into the path. We select the path, we see we've got the same path as the arm at the front. You want to press Shift and just bring up the ability to alter the path within the shape. So you select the path within the shape and just move it into position. There we go. And then we have our arm behind the body as well. So now we're going to do exactly the same thing for the legs. We'll take our pen tool, zoomed in there, and we're going to, instead of placing a single point, we're going to click and drag so we create a tangent like we would do in Illustrator for the top of the leg, and click and drag and create a tangent at the bottom. And the reason we're going to do this is so that later on when we come to animate the leg, we can make curves. So here we go, we've got shape layer 1 again, and we're going to call this leg front. And we're going to place this in front of the torso. And we're going to open it up and mess around with its parameters. So we're going to open up the stroke. We want the color to be the same as the body. We want the stroke width to match our Illustrator file. And we're going to keep the cap the same, just with the flat end for the leg. And there we go. And we're going to do the same thing again. Again, you can Control C, Control V and paste the leg into place. And then if you select the arrow tool here, you can move it about. Ooh, just about. You can do it with the arrow keys on your keyboard. Just move it into place. Now this leg is going to be called leg back, and so what we want to do is place it behind the torso. There we go. So our character's starting to look like our Illustrator file again. Now you'll notice the only thing that we're missing is that little shadow. So what we're going to do to this leg at the back, we're going to copy, edit, paste, so it sits right in front of it. We're going to call this layer leg back shadow. Again, we're going to open it up. Now you can go through the process of opening up all the layers as I've done here, or you can hit double U. That's the key U twice, and that'll bring up the parts of the path the parts of the shape layer that you've already changed. So it's just a quick way to get into there. And we're just going to make this a little bit darker. Now, rather than making the layer itself shorter, what we're going to do is we're going to go to add, and these are little functions that you can add to shape layers. And we're going to go to trim paths, and you'll notice a little trim paths fold down menu has appeared here. We're going to open that up, and what this is going to allow you to do is affect the length of the line of the path that you've created with the stroke. So you don't have to have the stroke run along it the whole way, and we're just going to have that sit at about 50%. And there we go. There's our character. Now what we can do finally is select the original arms and legs and arms and legs front and delete those. We're not going to need them anymore. So there we go. Okay, so welcome to part 3 of Create a Simple Animated Character. This part is called Rigging in After Effects. In this section, we're going to place our anchor points for rotational animation. We're going to parent our layers to the torso base. We're going to match up some stroke expressions with the pick whip tool. And we're going to hide unused layers and color and label our layers for clarity. Okay, so we're going to bring up our After Effects file here, and I've arranged the layers as follows. So with the front arms and legs at the very front, the head and torso in the middle, and the back legs, arm and shadow behind them. So the first thing we're going to do is look at anchor points. So we're going to be rotating elements of the composition, and we want them to rotate around particular points. You can see at the moment, this is an anchor point here in the middle, that the torso, the head, and all the legs and arms have their anchor point in the same position. What we're going to want to do is move these so that if I open up the head and we look at the rotation of the head, we can see that at the moment it's rotating around that center point. And that's not going to be any good to us. So what we're going to do is click on the pan behind tool, or hit Y, and we're just going to drag this up towards the back of the neck. And what that means now is that the head is going to rotate around that point, which is going to be a lot better for our animation, make a lot more sense. So we're going to do that for every part here. The torso we're going to have rotating around the hip. The arm at the front, we want that to rotate around the shoulder. The leg at the front, we want that to rotate around the hip here. So you can see now we've got something that resembles a hip joint. The shadow at the back, we want to rotate around the hip as well as the leg itself. And finally the arm at the back, we want that to rotate around the shoulder here. So there we go. So now all our anchor points are in the correct place. The next thing we're going to do is start parenting layers. So if we select the selection tool here and select the torso, what you'll notice is that when it moves in any way, whether it moves positionally or with a rotation, all the other elements stay where they are. And what we want to do is create a rig for our character whereby all the elements are jointed to all the other elements. So the head here, we want to connect that to the torso so that when the torso moves, the head moves. And the way we do that is with these switches here, the parent switches. So if it's not on your column, if it's not in the default settings, what you want to do is right-click above the switch where the switches would be, go down and just click on parent, and that'll bring up these switches. Now what we want to do is parent the head to the torso. And now you can see if we move the torso, the head goes with it. And we just want to do the same for almost all of these. The arm here, we're going to parent to the torso, front leg, torso, the back leg, and the back arm. Now the only thing we don't want to parent to the torso is this shadow layer that we've created. So I'm just going to solo these here, and we want to attach the shadow to the leg on which it's being cast, so that you can see that when we move the leg here, now the shadow is attached to it. And what you should have, if you've done that all correctly, if you select the torso and move the torso around, everything should follow it. So there we go. So now all that's left to do in the rigging is we want the shadow on the back leg, we want it to match up to the back leg movement in terms of the path that we create inside the shape layer. So if I open this up, we can see the shadow path here that we drew earlier with the pen tool is inside there. And if we go into the back leg, we see the path for the back leg is here. Now what we want to do, what we want to happen is when we move the back leg like so, we want the path, we want the shadow to follow it. So what we want is this path to be copying this path here. We want the leg back shadow to be copying the leg back. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this icon here, holding Alt, and then clicking down on the stopwatch icon, and it's going to bring up this console here, which is your expression console. Now we're going to ignore what's inside the box at the moment. All we're going to do is grab the pick whip, and we're going to drag it down into the path layer onto the path text in the back leg layer. It all sounds very complex, but all that means is now when we adjust the path in the leg, the shadow follows it, and that's going to be useful for later on. It means we don't have to duplicate layers and copy keyframes into each path. So there we go. And there's our guy again. Now in pick whipping the shadow to the leg, what that means is we no longer have to worry about what the shadow's doing. It's going to follow the animation in our legs. So what we can do is effectively get rid of it from the timeline, just ignore it. The way we're going to do that, we're going to click this little icon here, which is our shy layer icon, and then when we hide our shy layers, that disappears, and all that means is that we can ignore it and it's not getting in the way of our other layers which we're going to be animating. So if you want to see that layer again, if you want to adjust it, you can bring it back just by turning off the shy layer icon. And the very last thing we're going to do, we're going to color these layers just so that we know at a glance which are arms, which are legs. So the head and torso, that's straightforward. I'm going to make them pink. The two arms, I'm going to color yellow, and I'm going to leave the legs blue. And that just gives us we don't have to look back here every time to check which layer is which. We just know which is the front legs, the back legs, the head and the torso. Okay, so welcome back to part 4 of Create a Simple Animated Character. This section is Animate the Walk Cycle Part 1. In this section, we'll be using markers to establish a timeline loop. We're going to be creating a floor using the rulers and guides. We'll be keyframing the torso, and finally keyframing the head rotation. So here we are with our guy ready for animation on the timeline. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to mark out our loop workspace using the markers. Now we're going to start our loop at frame 100, and we're going to mark this by dragging this marker from the side of the timeline to frame 100. Now this is going to mark the beginning of our loop and our first stride. And I'm going to call this stride left. And that's going to be where our left foot is out front. And we're going to end the loop in exactly the same place. So we're going to go to frame 116, so 16 frames in length. We're going to mark that as left as well. And between the two of them at frame 108, we're going to drag the marker again, and we're going to call this frame right. There we go. And finally, between the two frames, we're just going to mark these every fourth frames. And we'll just leave these called 1 and 2. So there we should have left, 1, right, 2, left. And that's the order of our loop. And what we're going to do now is create a preview area and a workspace using our bounding work area bars. So I'm just going to drag this from the side down to frame 100. There we go. So that it lines up with the first marker and this, so it lines up with the final marker there. There we go. And now this is our temporal workspace. Now our next step is to, our character's currently sort of floating in midair, and we want to have a guide for where our ground layer is going to be, so that we know that his feet are on the ground at all times when they need to be. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to use some rulers and guides, and the way you're going to bring them up is go to View, Show Rulers, and that's going to give you your pixel dimensions in X and Y on the screen. And what you're going to do is click inside this area at the top where the measurements are, and just drag your ruler down to the feet. There we go. Once you've done that, stop it moving around. We're just going to go View and Lock Guides. And there we go. Now we have a ground layer for our character. Okay, so we're ready to animate our character now. And as I mentioned earlier on, when we rigged our character, the torso is the part of the body to which everything else is created. So that's the crux of our animation, and that's the part of the body that we're going to animate first. So what I want you to do is select the torso and the head with the solo layer checker, and that's just going to have these two bits be the only pieces on the screen that we can see. And on the torso, we're going to fold down our transform layer to reveal our position. And this is the part we're going to animate just now. Now what we're going to do in the walk cycle is animate the parts between, keyframe the parts between the strides first, because that's where our character is going to have one leg on the ground. As he's walking forwards, he's going to be at his highest point, and we're just going to check the position layer there. And he's going to be at the same point vertically at our number 2 marker, where he's between the right and left strides. So we're just going to create another keyframe there. That's exactly the same as the one before. Now if we go back to the beginning, this is our left stride. So this is with his left leg forward and his right leg behind. And as his legs are further apart, his body is going to be slightly lower. So we're going to pull the torso down there, and we're going to copy this keyframe. So you can edit, copy. We're going to go along to the right stride, and again his legs are going to be splayed, so he's going to be lower in frame again. We're going to go edit, paste, and we're going to paste the same keyframe to the left stride. Now what you're going to be able to do now, if you go Window and click Preview, that's going to bring up your preview console here, and if you just click this little round preview button, you'll be able to see the keyframes that you've animated render in real time. And what you'll notice from this is that our guy is quite mechanical. There's not a lot of character to him. He's sort of bouncing up and down in quite an unnatural way. So what we're going to do, we're going to add a little bit of keyframe easing, and that's going to give him a bounce that feels a little bit more organic and a little bit more characterful. And what we're going to do, we're going to ease the frames where he's at his highest. So as he bobs up and down, we want him just to ease at the top of his bounce before coming down. So we're going to go Animation. We're going to select these two keyframes, keyframe 1 and 2, between left, right, and left. We're going to go Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and Easy Ease. And that's going to give us these easing keyframes And when we play it back using the preview, it's going to feel a little bit more like a bounce. Now if we want to enhance that even further, we can adjust the keyframe influence. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select the keyframes again. I'm going to go Animation, Keyframe Keyframe Velocity. Now in here we've got the influence of the keyframes, incoming and outgoing. And at the moment they're set to 33%. We're going to increase that to 66. You click OK. And if we play back our RAM preview again, we feel like now he's really starting to bounce. He's starting to feel like a bit more interesting character. So now that we've got our torso looping, we're going to do the same sort of thing for our head. And the way we're going to do that, we're going to open up our head layer, and in transform here, we're going to deal with the rotation keyframe. Now, when our character is at the height of his bounce, I'm going to have him look down slightly. So I'm going to adjust the rotation to about 3 degrees, and you can just slide this along. And I'm going to keyframe it. I'm going to do exactly the same keyframe here at point 2, whereas in the same place vertically in his stride. Then I'm going to go back to this left stride marker, where he's now at the bottom of his torso is at his lowest point, and I'm going to have his head lean back slightly as he's looking up a little bit now. Again, about 3 degrees or so. And now I'm going to copy this keyframe. I'm going to paste this to the right stride, and again the left stride. And again, if we play this back, we're going to find that his head movement feels a little bit mechanical. So what we're going to do, we're going to select our 2 corresponding keyframes to the ones we selected earlier on the torso, this time in our rotation layer, and we're going to go to Keyframe Assistant, and we're going to click Easy Ease. We're going to go Animation, Keyframe Velocity, and again we're going to adjust the influence of that ease to 66, so it's the same as earlier. And now if we play that back, there we go, he feels a little bit more characterful. Now that we've got our keyframes looping, what we can do is select all these keyframes here, and we're going to copy them, go to the end of our loop, and we're just going to paste them again. And we're going to do the same thing on our torso layer. And what that means we can do now is slide both of these timelines past each other to create a slightly more interesting piece of secondary animation on the head. So if we shift the head frame a frame to the left, we'll see the keyframes still correspond, but they're a frame to the left of the torso keyframes. When we preview that, we get something a little bit more interesting. His head kind of leads the torso. If we slip it further, so it's entirely diametrically opposed, now it's kind of bobbing up and down. And you can play around with this until you get something you like. I'm going to have it sit a frame behind the loop. So there we go. So now his head's bouncing as if led slightly by the body. Hi, and welcome to part 2 of section 4, Animate the Walk Cycle. In this section, we'll be keyframing the main stride poses. We'll be adding animation between those poses. We'll be keyframing the arm rotation. And finally, we'll add some animation to the paths in the arms. Right, so if we open up After Effects again, and we've got our character on his loop, what we're going to do, we're going to uncheck the soloed head and torso layer. Now, when we play back our RAM preview, we're going to see our character is starting to bounce up and down. We're going to add the strides next. So we're going to start over here, back at the left marker, and beginning, we're going to start just with the left leg. The left leg and the left marker is going to be leading. So we open up our contents, go into our shape, go into our path, find our stroke again. What you're going to need to do is hold shift and click to animate and alter the path in here. And we're going to adjust the curves, excuse me, so that this leg is now curved forward. We want the foot to sit flush on the ground. Well, we've got it where we want it. We're going to keyframe it. Next, we're going to go to the right marker, and at this point the right foot is going to be out in front, and so our left foot is going to be at the back. Now, the foot doesn't need to sit flush to the ground anymore. He's just going to be about to raise it to take his next stride, so we can curve it like that. Now we've got a motion between our strides. Finally, what we're going to do on this leg is copy and paste our first keyframe to close the loop. So there we go. Now we have a looping animation of the left leg. Now what we're going to do is select our back leg, go into contents, shape, path, and select our path, hold shift, click on one point on the leg, and at this position, this leg is going to be in the backward state. So there we are. Going to keyframe our path. We're going to go to the right marker, and at the right marker we want our right leg to be leading. So again, adjust your path so that the curve creates a nice front leading leg, and then once again close the loop by copying and pasting your original keyframe. Now what we're going to start to have, if we hit our RAM preview, is something approaching the beginnings of a walk cycle. Now in this next step, we're going to create the animation between each stride. So we're going to select our front leg, this is our left leg, and we'll see that if we move along the timeline between our left and right strides, this leg is going backwards, which means that in the middle here, this leg should be on the ground pushing our guy forwards. So what we're going to do, select our path, and for this keyframe, what we're going to do is drop our leg down and straighten it up slightly. There we go. And there's our guy. Now if we scrub through the keyframes again, we're going to see that he's starting to look like he's pulling his rear leg through as he places his front leg. We're going to move along to point 2 here between the right and left strides, and we're going to see that between the right and left strides, this front leg is going to be pulling underneath before he plants his foot again for the left stride. So what we're going to do at point 2 is lift our leg right up and curl it underneath like that. So now, if we solo our left leg, we're going to have something approaching a walking leg. Now it's not quite right yet, and we're going to fix that in a minute. But first we're going to do the same thing to our rear leg. Now this leg here is pulling forward, so at point 1 we're going to tuck this leg under. There we go. Curve that out. And then at point 2, as the rear leg is pushing us forwards, we're going to plant it back down on the ground with our guide. Now if we save that and hit RAM preview, we're starting to get something close to a walk cycle. Now again, slightly mechanical because we're using all flat keyframes. We want to add some character to it. We're going to select all our corresponding keyframes that we're going to add ease to, and you can spot them. They're the ones underneath. They're the ones that are next to the keyframes on the torso that have got easing on, these slightly misshapen keyframes. We're going to select them. They're the points at 1 and 2. We're going to go Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. We're going to go Animation, Keyframe Velocity, and we're going to add our high influence, 66% keyframe influence again. We'll save that. And now if you play back our walk cycle, we've got something with a lot more character. And now lastly, we're going to add some animation to the arms. So this time we're going to be adding rotational animation to both. So we want to open up our arm layer, go into rotation, and now as our front leg is forwards, we're going to pull our front arm back. And we're going to keyframe that. And then on our right stride, when the leg is back, we're going to pull the arm forward. And again, we're going to copy and paste to close our loop. Now on the other side here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to open up our transformation. When this arm is forwards and backwards, this one's going to be forwards. When the other arm's forwards, this one's going to be back. And then copy and paste to close the loop again. And we're going to select all of these and give them some keyframe assistant easing. And this time for velocity, because we're using velocity all the time, we're going to use something a little bit lower. We're going to use 44. And we play that back, and our guy is nearly complete. The very last thing we're going to do, we're going to add some path animation to our arms. So we're going to go into the shape layer and select the path. Here's our path. And when our guy's arm is bent back, we're going to bend at the elbow here. When our guy's arm is forward, we're going to keyframe in a slightly straighter arm. And then once again, we're going to copy and paste our keyframe to close our loop. We're going to do the same thing on this rear arm. So at the beginning of the stride, this path is going to be flattened out. And there we go. Let's curve it the other way. As he's pulled his arm back, probably not going to be able to see it here, but we're going to curve his elbow out. And then once again, copy and paste, close the loop. We're going to select these keyframes, as we did before, for both arms. And we're going to add our easing and our keyframe velocity, 44. Now we can select everything, close it down, and when we hit our RAM preview, there we go. Now we've got a guy walking. Now you can stop there, but what we're going to do, we're going to select all our keyframes, and on the keyboard we're going to hit the letter U. And what that's going to do is bring up all our used keyframes. Now, as we did earlier with the head, we're just going to copy, we're going to select for each layer, we're going to copy and paste our keyframes onto the end of each loop, and that's just going to double the length of our loop. So, there we go for both arms. We're going to copy and paste the keyframes of both legs, and we've already got it done on our torso and body. And what we're going to do now is start to slide these keyframes around and create animation that's got a little bit of secondary motion to it. And you can just play about with these. I'm going to move his arms forward there so you can see that he's sort of walking with a bit more purpose, or you can slide them back. and see that they're kind of lagging behind the walk cycle. What you can do on top of that is move the path keyframes against the rotational keyframes, and you'll get arms that have more of a kind of circular movement to them. They're not just swinging, they're sort of rotating. Now as we hit play on the RAM preview, there we have it, your fully animated looping character walk cycle.
Hey guys, this is the fifth and final section of our class titled Render, Export and Share Your GIF. In this section, we're going to add a background color and shadow to our character. We're going to pre-comp our cycle for rendering. We're going to render the loop as a QuickTime. We're going to import the QuickTime into Photoshop, export the GIF from Photoshop, and finally we're going to post our animated GIF.
Okay, so we're going to open up our After Effects file. Here's our guy again. He's happily looping. And what we're going to do now is we're going to add a background color to him. And we're going to go Layer, New, Solid. And I'm going to use this bright green here. Here's our layer, it's at the front, so we're going to drag it down to the back of the comp so we can see all the elements of our character. I'm just going to rename this background. Now our character feels slightly like he's floating in midair, so we're going to add a shadow just to give us a sense of where the ground is. And we're going to do that the same way we made all the arms and legs. We're going to grab the pen tool, make sure nothing's selected in the timeline, so that when we draw a line underneath our guy here, we create a new shape layer. I'm just going to call this layer Shadow. I'm going to move this to the back, but in front of the background. And we're going to open this up like we did earlier, and we're going to go into our stroke layer, and I'm going to make this layer black. And you'll notice once I increase the stroke width that it's a bit too dark. So I'm going to go into our transform functions, right down to the bottom to our opacity, and I'm going to make this 20%. Now, you'll notice when we play back that as the guy's legs move, he bobs up and down. The shadow should probably change in shape. So what we're going to do when he's higher is we're going to make the shadow smaller, then when he's lower and more spread out, we're going to keep it wide. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to keyframe it very simply. We're going to go into our path layer inside the shadow. Grab your selection tool, hold shift just to bring up the editability of the path. I'm going to drag this out a little bit more. Then I'm going to move to our mid part of our step, and I'm going to decrease the length of this. I'm going to go to the right, and I'm going to copy and paste our original keyframe, wide keyframe. That pretty much fits. So I'm going to copy our narrower shadow. Actually, that could probably be even thinner. And finally, I'm going to close our loop, copying and pasting the wide shadow. So there we go. And you notice it's a little bit off again. We need to adjust our keyframe velocity using the keyframe assistant, Easy Ease, animation, keyframe velocity. Make this 66 and 66 and our influence. And that's just going to match up with where our torso is. So now when we play it back, there we go, fits with the animation. So now we've got our animated character, we're going to export this and create a GIF. But before we do that, you'll notice that our composition settings are fairly huge. We have a 1920 by 1080 comp at the moment, and we're going to want something smaller for the web. Now, I'm going to export this to Dribble, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to select my character in the project console, and I'm going to drag it into a new composition. And it's going to look exactly the same as before. It's going to adopt the settings of the original comp. So what we're going to do, we're going to go Composition, Composition Settings, I'm going to call this character Dribble. And Dribble uses a 400 by 300 panel. So what we've got now, here's our original comp. It's a bit large, so we're going to shrink this down. And if we view it at full resolution and at full scale, this is going to be our final output product. So now we have to bring our render bars back in so that we just render our loop. You'll notice that when we import the character, it brings with it our markers. So we just want to make sure we bound our markers as before. We'll save it and we'll do a quick RAM preview test. There we go, perfect. So now we've got our final composition at our final scale looping properly, we're ready to render. So we bounded our comp and we're going to go composition and we're going to say hit make movie. And this is going to bring up our render console, and if we look into the output module, this should all be set up correctly. We want a quick time, all our size options are correct, no audio, and then if you select your desktop, your output to the desktop, hit render, and there we go, you'll hear the chime when the render's done. If you go to your desktop, what you should find is a very short loop, a single loop of your character. Okay, great, so we've got our character here on our desktop. We're going to open Photoshop, and we're going to go File, Open, and we're going to select our QuickTime movie. And here he is. Now he's going to appear as a still image in this, and what we're going to want to do is go File and Save for Web and Devices. And this is going to bring up this console here. I'm going to take a screenshot of these settings. These are just the default settings. The only thing we're going to change is our looping options. We want our loop to loop forever. And there we go. You can preview your loop, and that's going to be your animated GIF. And all we're going to do, once we've changed the looping options to forever, we're going to save this to our desktop. And that's it. And finally, I'm going to share my work. I'm going to upload my character to Dribble. Okay, I've named my file, I'm going to publish it. There we go. And if you don't have a Dribble account, no problem, you can still share it in the student project section. I've uploaded my guy here. I'm going to post him. And there you go, animated GIF.